The desert did not whisper that day. It howled. A dust storm rose across the Arizona plains, twisting sand into a red-brown wall that blotted out the horizon. Mesquite bent sideways, cattle bawled in panic, and the sky itself seemed ready to split open. And in the teeth of that storm, a lone woman stood on the sagging porch of her ranch house, skirt whipping like a flag, rifle pressed tight to her shoulder, eyes narrowed against the grit. Her name was Clara Hensley, widow, fighter, keeper of land no one thought she could hold. Before I take you deeper into her story, let me pause for just a moment, because if you love tales of grit and romance carved into the Wild West, then saddle up with us here on Wild West Love Stories. Every week we bring you fire-lit moments, outlawed romances, and love that survives the storm. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so you never miss the next ride into the frontier. Now, let's get back to Clara. 3 men rode up through the storm that day. Their outlines came slow and ghost-like out of the dust, but Clara recognized their kind before she could see their faces. Hired men, rough coats, easy hands on their holsters. They wanted her ranch, or more truthfully, the railroad behind them did. "Widow Hensley," one of them shouted over the wind, spitting dust from his teeth. "Sheriff Boyd says this land's wasted on you. Best sell it and move along. We're here to persuade you polite-like." Clara spat into the dust. "If Boyd wants it, he can come himself. Till then, you boys can ride back the way you came." The men laughed. One tapped the butt of his revolver. "Don't be stubborn, ma'am. You'll lose either way." Her grip on the rifle tightened. The land behind her, barn with a half-collapsed roof, fences broken by storms, fields long since browned by drought, was all she had left of her family. Her boy buried out back. Her husband, shot dead 2 years before in a quarrel she'd never been able to avenge. This patch of desert was more than dirt. It was memory. "You take one more step," she said, steady but low, "and you'll meet the same fate as the rattlers that get too close to my door." For a moment, coat whipping behind him, hat brim low, revolvers already drawn. 2 sharp reports cracked like lightning. The riders chasing Clara dropped before they even knew what struck them, bodies tumbling into the sand. The storm swallowed the sound, leaving only the groan of wind and Clara's own ragged breath. She lowered her rifle, staring through the haze at the man who'd just saved her life. He swung down from his horse with the calm weight of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Boots struck dirt, spurs clinking soft under the roar of the wind. His face was shadowed, jaw rough with days of travel, eyes like steel. He holstered his gun slow, deliberate. "Don't thank me," he said, voice low and rough. "I wasn't here for you." Clara raised the rifle again, rage boiling through her fear. "Then why are you here, gunslinger?" The man glanced at the bodies on the ground, then back at her. Dust streaked across his coat, scars peeking from his gloves. Everything about him spoke of bloodshed, of pasts carried heavy and unshaken. "Sometimes trouble don't come looking for me," he said. "Sometimes I ride into it." Her jaw tightened. She'd heard of men like him, men who lived by the gun and left widows in their wake. Men who killed for coin, not conscience. "I don't need your kind's help," she snapped. "You're nothing but another hired killer." The faintest twitch touched his mouth. Not a smile, not anger either, just the weary knowledge of a man who'd heard the same judgment too many times. "Lady," he said, "I don't get hired, not anymore." The storm shoved hard against them, flinging grit into their eyes. Clara blinked against it, tears burning her vision but not softening her heart. She saw the way he stood, steady in the gale, unflinching, almost part of the desert itself. And yet, beneath that, something else. A scar running from his wrist up under his sleeve. The mark of a man who'd drawn too often, lived too long by steel. Her stomach turned. Her husband had been gunned down by a black-hatted stranger 2 years ago. The town had whispered his name, Elias Mercer, and now he stood on her porch. The gunslinger touched the brim of his hat. "Storm will rip your roof clean off. If you're smart, You'll would, because the desert was wide, but not wide enough to escape the past. The storm finally broke that night. Rain came thin at first, then harder, rattling against the tin roof like 1,000 silver bullets. Clara lay awake inside her ranch house, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tight as a wire. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in her memory, and the echo of Elias Mercer's voice refused to leave her ears. She had sworn, after burying her husband, that she would never again depend on a man, least of all one who made his living by the gun. And yet, when the storm had raged and death was a heartbeat away, it had been Mercer who rode out of the dust. Her pride told her to curse him. Her heart told her to remember. Both kept her from sleep. By dawn, Clara forced herself to her feet. The storm had torn half her fences down, scattered feed across the mud, and left the barn doors clattering loose. Work waited, and work was the only cure she had for thoughts that threatened to tear her apart. She tugged her coat close, stepped into the yard, and nearly dropped her hammer. Mercer was there. He was kneeling by the corral, tightening a post with a length of rope, hat low against the drizzle. His horse stood nearby, steam curling from its nostrils. Clara's hand went to the rifle slung on her shoulder. "You've got a bold nerve, gunslinger. Trespassing after you've done what you did yesterday?" Mercer didn't even look at her. "Your corral was ready to give. If it fell, you'd lose what little stock you've got left." Her jaw set hard. "Didn't ask for your charity. Didn't give it," he replied, cinching the rope and standing in one smooth motion. "Just figured I owed you one, seeing as you saved my life too." Clara blinked, thrown off balance. "Saved you?" Mercer finally met her gaze, and for a moment she saw something in those gray eyes, something tired, something honest. "That man you winged yesterday? He was aiming square at my back. Your shot gave me the half-second I needed." The words struck her like a hammer blow. She'd never thought of it that way, never thought she could have had any part in the fight but desperation. She lifted her chin, masking her unease. "Don't try to square debts with me, Mercer. You may ride off and leave bodies in the dust, outnumbered." Clara stiffened. "You think I'll scare that easy?" "No," he said. His voice was steady, grave. "That's the problem." Her hands curled tight around the rifle stock. "I'll not be run off. Not by Boyd, not by his men, and sure as hell not by you." Mercer gave a small nod as though her fire didn't surprise him. "Then you'll need help." The word help burned in her ears. For 2 years, she'd survived by her own grit, by calluses on her hands and iron in her soul. And here was the very man who'd once been named in the whispers about her husband's death, standing in her yard, offering protection. She almost spat in the mud, but then, like a cruel trick of memory, her eyes flicked to the fresh graves by the cottonwoods, her boy, her husband. If she turned Mercer away now, what would happen when the next riders came? Her silence stretched long. Mercer adjusted his coat as if he'd already read her refusal. He swung up into the saddle, horse stamping against the wet earth. "Suit yourself, Widow Hensley. I'll ride on." He nudged the reins and his horse turned. The sight of him leaving sparked something raw in Clara's chest. Anger? Fear? Maybe both. Against her better judgment, she called after him. "Mercer!" He stopped, half-turned in the saddle. Rain dripped from his hat brim. "If you stay," she said slowly, the words dragged like barbed wire from her throat. "You do it on my terms. My land, my rules. You don't drink in my house, you don't swagger, and you sure as hell don't think saving me once gives you a claim." A flicker crossed his face. Amusement, maybe respect. It was hard to tell with a man like him. "Fair enough," he said, and dismounted. Clara's gut twisted. She'd just invited a wolf into her yard. By evening, Mercer had patched half her fences, reset the barn doors, and built a fire that actually drew warmth into the kitchen. Clara watched him work, every muscle in her body screaming at her to stay cold, to stay guarded. Yet each time she caught his eye, something shifted. A man carved of steel and shadow, but not untouched by decency. As darkness fell, Clara found herself staring into the route. The man was a gunslinger, a wanderer of violence, yet somehow her yard didn't look so broken with him in it. She shook the notion away and set her jaw. There was wood to split, animals to feed, a leaking roof to mend. A widow had no time for foolish musings. But when she rounded the barn, there he was again, Mercer, already at work, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his long frame bent as he shoveled out the muck. His horse stood saddled near the post, though the reins hung loose. It looked less like a man ready to ride on and more like one quietly settling in. Clara folded her arms. "That your way of saying good mornin'? Stealin' chores before I can get to 'em?" Mercer paused, leaning on the shovel, a faint half-smile ghosting across his face. "Figured if I kept busy you wouldn't aim that rifle of yours at me so often." She huffed, half amused despite herself. "Keep talking and I just might." The day stretched long, and though Clara tried to carry the same edge she always did, the hours softened it. Side by side they fixed what the storm had broken. When she climbed to mend the roof, he steadied the ladder. When he cut fence posts, she held them in place. They spoke little, but silence itself began to change. What had once been cold and heavy now carried a strange weight, a hum beneath the skin. At noon they shared bread and beans at the kitchen table. Clara noticed how he bowed his head slightly before eating, though no words passed his lips. He was rough, scarred, but not without something. Respect, maybe. "You ever stay put anywhere?" she asked, watching him break the bread with care. "Not for long," he said. "Dust tends to follow me." "That's supposed to be poetry?" "Truth," he replied simply. Her eyes narrowed. "Truth is, men like you ride into towns, stir trouble, then vanish when the blood dries. Leave folks like me to bury what's left." Mercer's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He only said, "I know." It was an admission that surprised her more than denial would have. That evening the air grew sharp with cold. Clara lit a lantern while Mercer sat at his boots. "No," he admitted, "but I know what boys want. I was one once." Something in his tone, that rare break in the armor, stirred her. She hated it. She needed her distance. But her eyes betrayed her, lingering on the scar beneath his jaw, the way the lantern light caught in his gray eyes. That night, Clara lay awake again. The sound of Mercer pacing outside drifted through her walls. She realized he kept watch, making sure no riders came under cover of darkness. It was the first night she hadn't felt entirely alone since her husband's death. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm. Work, firelight, silence. A word or two when the world allowed. Slowly, suspicion gave way to something else. Not trust, not yet, but the ghost of it. One morning, Clara found Mercer in the barn, binding a wound on his forearm. Blood stained the cloth, fresh from where a nail had caught him. "You fool," she muttered, grabbing clean linen. Without asking, she pushed his hand aside and wrapped the wound herself. Her fingers brushed the roughness of his skin, and she felt the tension in him, the stillness of a man unused to being touched. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world outside the barn fell silent. Clara pulled away, flustered, tying the cloth tighter than necessary. "Don't think this means I like you being here." Mercer gave that quiet, almost smile again. Didn't figure it did. By the week's end, the barn stood stronger than before, the fence straighter, the roof no longer leaking. Clara looked at her land and saw more than survival. She saw the faint shape of hope. But hope was dangerous. She reminded herself every hour that Mercer was no rancher, no neighbor, no savior. He was a gunslinger with blood on his hands and shadows in his wake. And yet, each time their shoulders brushed in passing, each time she caught him watching the horizon for danger, each time she found the small cedar horse carved smooth and set gently on her windowsill, Clara's resolve cracked. In the stillness of the desert, Something fragile was being built. Not with nails and rope, but with glances, gestures, and unspoken truths. Something she swore she would never allow again. The days of uneasy peace didn't last. They never do. Not in Arizona. Tipped his hat too low, his smile too wide. The kind of man who thought law was just another coin to be traded. "You know, Clara," Boyd drawled one afternoon, leaning on her corral as though it belonged to him, "that railroad office is still looking to buy your spread. Price keeps climbing. You sell now, you could ride east, start fresh." "I told you before," Clara said coldly, "this land was my husband's, and it'll stay mine." Boyd clicked his tongue, feigning disappointment. "Suit yourself. Just remember, the railroad don't take kindly to stubbornness. Neither do the men they hire." His gaze slid past her shoulder. Mercer had stepped out of the barn, hands at his sides, eyes hard as river stone. The sheriff's grin widened. "Well now, look at this. Didn't know you kept company with the likes of Elias Mercer." Clara stiffened. "You know him?" Boyd chuckled, slow and mean. "Know him. Whole territory knows him. Black-hatted devil of the San Pedro raid, ain't that right, Mercer?" The name hit Clara like a bullet. She turned sharply to Elias, searching his face. He didn't answer, didn't move, only stood there with his silence as damning as any confession. Boyd tipped his hat again. "You watch yourself, widow. You think that man saved you? Ask him how many graves he's already filled." When the sheriff rode off, Clara rounded on Elias. "Tell me it's not true," she demanded, voice breaking under the weight of fear and fury. His jaw flexed, but no words came. "Say it," she shouted. Mercer's gray eyes lifted to hers, and what she saw in them stole the breath from her chest. Not denial, not even shame, but weariness. The kind that comes from carrying a truth so long it eats you alive. "It's true," he said finally, voice low. The world tilted beneath her feet. The San Pedro raid. She remembered the stories. Railroad skirmishes, ranchers caught in the crossfire, her own husband among the dead. And now here stood the man who had pulled the trigger. Clara stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. "God help me, I let you into my home." Mercer took a step toward her, but she raised the rifle in shaking hands. "Don't," she hissed. He stopped, lifting his palms. "It ain't the way." From the branches. Mercer's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He only turned, gathered his horse, and rode out, leaving nothing behind but hoofprints and silence. That night, Clara sat by the fire, staring at the small cedar horse Mercer had carved. She wanted to throw it into the flames, to watch it burn to ash, but her hand refused. Instead, she set it back on the sill, tears spilling hot and unchecked. She hated him. She hated herself more for wishing he'd come back. Meanwhile, Elias Mercer rode hard into the desert, anger burning hotter than the sun. Not at Clara, but at himself. He'd tried to leave the past buried, but the past never stayed buried in a land like this. And Boyd was stirring the pot, feeding the railroad's hunger, twisting the knife. At a lonely campfire, Mercer lit the cigarette he hadn't before. Smoke curled into the night, bitter on his tongue. He thought of Clara's eyes, the fury, the betrayal, the hurt. He thought of the San Pedro raid, of the blood he couldn't wash from his hands. And he thought of Jonas Pike. If Boyd was the snake in the grass, Pike was the rattler that struck. Old partner turned enemy, outlaw still hunting coin and vengeance. Mercer knew if Pike was circling Clara's land, the widow would be swallowed whole. He cursed under his breath. He could ride on, leave it all behind, let her hate him forever. That would be easier. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's hands shaking on the rifle, her voice cracking as she told him to go. He saw her standing alone on that patch of dirt, outnumbered, stubborn as the desert itself. And he knew he couldn't leave, not yet. Back at the ranch, Clara woke to the sound of hoofbeats on the horizon. But it wasn't Mercer. It was Pike and his men, riding under Boyd's crooked blessing, torches in hand. The storm was coming, and this time, Clara would face it alone. Night fell heavy, the sky a black vault pricked with stars, the air sharp with the smell of dry mesquite. Clara stood on her porch, rifle in hand, listening to the restless stir of her cattle. Something was wrong. The night was too still. Then she heard it, hoofbeats. Not one horse, not two, but many. A low thunder rolling closer. Clara's heart seized. Boyd's warning ground. Pike's men laughed, spreading wide, torches swinging. "You can't shoot us all, girl," Pike sneered, "but you can die trying." The first shot cracked through the night. Clara fired, dropping a rider from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Torches arced through the dark, landing against the barn. Flames leapt high, licking greedily at the dry wood. Clara's chest tightened as smoke billowed. Her animals screamed inside the corral, panicked. She fired again, dropped another man, but there were too many. Bullets tore into the porch rails, splintering wood around her. A torch landed against the house wall. Fire roared to life. Clara coughed, eyes burning, lungs filling with smoke. She stumbled toward the door, ready to defend her home room by room if she had to. Her heart pounded like a war drum. And then, a new sound, a single rifle shot, sharp and clean, from the ridge. A rider fell, another shot, another man crumpled. Through the haze of fire and smoke, Clara saw him, Elias Mercer. He rode hard into the fray, guns blazing, his coat billowing behind him like a shadow of judgment. Each shot found its mark, each movement precise, deadly. Men shouted his name in fear, scattering, but Pike roared orders, keeping them on her land. Mercer dismounted, firing as he ran, sliding to Clara's side. Smoke and fire painted his face, but his eyes were steady. "Get down!" he barked, shoving her behind the porch rail just as bullets tore through the boards. Clara's fury boiled up. "You came back, after everything." "Didn't come for forgiveness," Mercer growled, reloading with swift hands. "Came 'cause you won't survive this without me." He rose, fired, dropped another man. Clara, coughing hard, lifted her rifle and joined him. Side by side, they fought. Widow and gunslinger, firelight casting them in gold and ash. Pike's men pressed hard, torches raining, bullets biting into wood and stone. The barn collapsed in flames, heat searing the air. The corral gate burst, cattle stampeding into the dark. Then Pike himself strode forward, revolver in one hand, torch in the other. His grin was all teeth. "Mercer, you always did have a taste for lost causes." Mercer stepped out from the smoke, eyes locked on the outlaw. "And you always did the desert." The fire crackled loud, casting sparks into the night sky. "You don't get to leave me now, Elias Mercer." He looked at her then, truly looked, past the hatred, past the betrayal. His lips parted, and for once his voice was soft. "I wasn't worth coming back for," he whispered, blood on his teeth. "But you were worth staying for." Clara's tears fell hot onto his face as she pressed cloth to his wound. "Don't you dare die here, not after saving me, not after this." His hand brushed hers, weak but certain. "Clara, if I don't make it." "You will," she snapped, fierce as fire. "You hear me? You will." The flames roared around them, but Clara didn't care. The ranch could burn, the fences could fall, the cattle could scatter. All that mattered was the man bleeding in her arms. The man she had sworn to hate. The man who had laid down his life to protect hers. For the first time since San Pedro, Elias Mercer closed his eyes, not in shame, not in exile, but in the fragile hope of redemption. And for the first time since her husband's death, Clara prayed, not for survival, but for love. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the desert in muted strokes of rose and gold. The ranch lay smoldering, the barn reduced to ash, the house blackened by fire but still standing. The air reeked of smoke, blood, and the faint sweetness of burned mesquite. Clara knelt in the dirt beside Elias Mercer, her hands stained red, her breath ragged. She had worked through the night, tearing strips of cloth from her own dress, pressing them into his wound, whispering words she wasn't sure were prayers or curses. His skin was pale, his lips dry, but he still breathed. Every rise of his chest was a miracle she clung to. "You stubborn fool," she murmured, voice breaking. "You saved me, but you left yourself half dead." His eyes flickered open, gray like storm clouds. A faint smile tugged his mouth. "Reckon I've been half dead a long while, Clara. This feels like something better." She hushed him, pressing cool water to his lips. "Don't waste strength on talk. You're not dying here, not after all this." The cattle had scattered into the desert night. The barn was gone, the corral, her gaze drifting back to Elias. Randall crouched beside the wounded gunman, frowning. "Mercer, never thought I'd see you back in these parts." Elias coughed, wincing. "Didn't come back for me." His eyes found Clara's. "Came back for her." The sheriff studied them both, then nodded slow. "Reckon you earned another chance, son. Pike's gang won't trouble this land again." He glanced toward the horizon, where scavenger birds already circled. "But you've still got a choice to make." Clara squared her shoulders, her voice steady though her heart trembled. "His choice is here, with me. If you've got something against that, Sheriff, you'll have to go through me, too." The deputies exchanged glances, surprised by her fire. Randall just tipped his hat. "Not my quarrel, widow. Not anymore." The days that followed were slow, tender battles of their own. Clara nursed Elias inside the charred remains of her house, turning the parlor into a sick room. She ground herbs, boiled water, cleaned his wound with steady hands, though every touch made her chest ache. Nights were long. She sat awake listening to his ragged breaths, whispering stories of the land, of her late husband, of the dreams she once had when the ranch was whole. Elias listened even when his eyes stayed closed. And sometimes, when pain loosened his tongue, he told her things too. He spoke of the San Pedro raid, of how his bullet had struck her husband by accident in the chaos, how guilt had driven him to vanish into the desert. He confessed to the years spent wandering, never staying in one town, never laying his head anywhere he could call home. "I wasn't running from law," he rasped one night as moonlight cut across his face. "I was running from you, from the look in your eyes that day. Thought if I stayed gone, maybe your hate would fade easier." Clara's throat tightened. She brushed damp hair from his forehead. "It didn't fade, not for years. But hate's a heavy thing to carry, Elias. It wore me down more than grief ever did." His hand found hers, weak but steady. "And now?" She hesitated, then squeezed his fingers. Clara found him outside, leaning on a cane, watching the sunrise. "Never thought I'd live to see another spring," he murmured. She stood beside him, arms folded against the chill. "Reckon you've got more than one left in you, Mercer." He looked at her, the lines of his face softened by dawn. "If I do, I don't want 'em spent alone." The words hung between them, heavy as thunder, tender as rain. Clara felt her chest ache, not with grief this time, but with something dangerously close to joy. She stepped closer, laid a hand on his arm. "Then don't." By summer, the ranch was alive again. The house bore a new coat of whitewash. A new barn rose, its beams stronger than the last. Neighbors came often, bringing food, nails, timber, not just out of pity, but out of kinship. Clara and Elias worked side by side, sweat mingling, silence speaking more than words ever could. And somewhere in the midst of that work, love grew, not the young, bright fire she had once known with her husband, but a steadier flame, born of pain and forgiveness. On a quiet evening, beneath a sky ablaze with stars, Elias pressed a ring into her palm. It wasn't gold, just a simple band hammered from silver. His voice shook when he spoke. "Clara, I can't undo what's been done, can't give back what I took, but I can give you what's left of me, if you'll have it." Her eyes blurred with tears, but her voice was clear. "You're a fool, Elias Mercer, but you're my fool now." He kissed her then, slow and sure, the kiss of a man who had carried guilt like a noose and finally laid it down. And for Clara, it was the kiss of a woman who had lived in shadow and found light again, not in forgetting, but in forgiving. Years later, folks would pass by the ranch and speak of it with quiet awe. They'd tell of the widow who stood against Pike's gang, of the outlaw who gave his blood to save her, and of the love that rose from ashes and smoke. But for Clara and Elias, there were no legends, no stories, just the land, the seasons, the work, and the bond they had carved from fire and loss. Theirs was not